We're going to make a start now. Thank you ever so much for coming along tonight. Lots and lots of people here, and some older members and some new members, and I'm really pleased to welcome Young Labour along tonight. I met them a couple of weeks ago, and they've come along tonight because they said they were going to come. And sitting over there in the corner, they were at the meeting a couple of weeks ago that we had at Unite, and they've come along tonight, and it's really, really great that you're here. In the week, we celebrated 100 years of some women getting the vote. Of course, it was 10 years later when all women got the vote. Only those that had property could vote 100 years ago. But as Joe said, we welcome every move and for women to get the vote 100 years ago, and if it meant that it was just women who had property, then so be it, but at least it happened, didn't it? Women fought hard for it, and there are many heroes from the past, far too many for me to mention, but I'm going to mention my mum because she was to me. When I started work in 1969, I was 15. And I wasn't getting equal pay. And now I look back and think, wow, because we really did work hard to get equal pay, always been in a trade union. But there's always something to fight for. We thought that was it. We had got equal pay, weren't we doing well? But as you know, as years go past, there's many more things to fight for. And now, women, being not the largest group in Parliament, but certainly in Labour, in the Labour Parliamentary Party, we're larger than the Tories. There's so much more that's being brought up and being discussed. And it's more difficult now because we have social media. We know that everything that goes with social media, and Jess will tell you about that and some of the threats she's had. It's difficult, isn't it, for women and all politicians to put their head above the parapet. However, we have someone here tonight who indeed has put her head above that parapet. She was elected with me in 2015, and what a storm she caused when she came in. She's a member of the Backbench Committee, member of the Women and Equalities Select Committee, and she chairs the Women's Parliamentary Labour Party very, very well and gets things done. I'd like to introduce Jess Phillips. I'm going to get Jess to just give us a talk first, and then I'll open it up and you can ask her questions, anything about anything she does, really. Yeah, and she does a whole lot. So I'll hand over to Jess. Do you want this?
Hang on. Do you think that I need it? Yeah. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Okay, all right. I won't cast aspersions on people who can't hear. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here tonight. I go to a lot of things all around the country and speak at different CLPs. I was in Manchester last week, and I was in Lincolnshire the week before, but it is a genuine pleasure to actually be in the region that I come from. As the Coventry Road runs through my constituency, it's fairly easy for me to get here, and it is always a pleasure to be in the West Midlands, because whilst I love the Labour Party, I love my bit of the Labour Party the best. Yeah. And we are different in the West Midlands. And it is a real pleasure to be here with Colleen, who is the first woman ever elected to this seat, which I think is absolutely brilliant. My seat, I was the second woman ever to be in my seat. The first was Estelle Morris, who was the Education Secretary in the last Labour government. I think that, you know, we are just better in the West Midlands. Mainly, when I was in Manchester, my son came with me, and because I don't see my children unless I take them to things with me. I was going to bring my youngest son today, but he was sick this morning and I didn't want to share his sickness with Coventry, you'll be pleased to hear. I had to say to him in the car on the way, my son, he said to me, "Is Manchester bigger than Birmingham?" And I was like, "No, it isn't." And he said, "Is it the second city?" I was just like, I mean, who have I been raising? Of course it is not the second city. And he said, "You and Dad are always rude about Manchester." And I was like, "Well, you have to keep that to yourself tonight. We're not going to talk about mine and Dad's feelings about Manchester tonight." And the truth of the matter is, the reason why I love the West Midlands so much is because we aren't particularly blasé. We aren't trying to say we're the absolute best in the world like Manchester seems to want to do. And we're pretty understated. What I really love about the West Midlands is that if you say somebody is all right, that is the highest form of praise. That it basically means they're everything, they are all right. Whereas to other people, it sounds like you're basically saying that they're not that good, really. And that is what I like about the West Midlands. We're understated, but we are just better. So it's a pleasure to be here. Colleen asked me to talk a little bit about my experiences of getting into Parliament and then being in Parliament. And I think that always when I go and talk to Labour parties, it is important, especially because we're in opposition, it is important to root how I got into Parliament further back than just trying to get selected. Because the last Labour government changed my life and I owe it an enormous debt and enormous gratitude, and without it I would never be in the House of Commons today. So under the last Labour government, I wasn't old enough, I know that your first job was in 1969, but I wasn't actually old enough to vote in the 1997 election. I was 16 years old and I campaigned incredibly hard, but I wasn't allowed to vote. But from the age of 16 until the Labour government left office in 2010, I had my first baby, bought my first house, got my education, got my first job, had my second baby. Every single stage of my life, really, into my adulthood and my development and the opportunities that I was given, came about because of something, a decision made by a woman and a man, and it's largely the women stuff that affected me, but women and men, just like me and Colleen, who were elected to the Labour Party and sat in the House of Commons. And I think that we don't give enough praise for some of the things that we did that changed people's lives. So when I was 21, I got pregnant with my first baby unexpectedly. I found that I was pregnant. I mean, obviously, it's not that unexpected. I know how it happened. I mean, I was a teenager in the Blair years when the amount of teenage pregnancy awareness that was done in my school, I played with a lot of those crying baby dolls. So I do know how it happened. But I hadn't expected that was how my life was going to turn out. And when I had my son, what I found was that I was lucky enough to be in an era when the Labour government had made sure that I had access to tax credits so that I'd be able to afford to both stay at home and also have a part-time job and be able to afford that, and it wouldn't threaten my livelihood, it wouldn't threaten the house that I had recently bought, because, you know, people who were 21 could buy houses back then. Sorry about that. It doesn't happen anymore. And they basically, at every stage of me wanting to have a job and be a mother, put a rung of the ladder in front of me that said, keep on climbing up this, we will help you. And whether that was the free childcare place that I got when my second son Danny was born, he was born literally on the day that my eldest son got his free nursery place. And it is entirely because I could never have afforded to have another child and go to work had it not been for free nursery places created by women like Harriet Harman, Yvette Cooper. When my son wasn't well and was struggling at school It was in a Sure Start centre that helped to diagnose his special educational needs and give me support. A Sure Start centre that is now closed. It doesn't exist anymore. It was when I was working and forging my career. I was working in voluntary sector agencies, and every single one of those was funded by things like the Neighbourhood Renewal Fund, which I'm sure some of the councillors in the room will remember. Projects that meant that local councils could afford to fund people, and I worked with asylum seekers, I worked with young offenders, I worked with elderly people with Alzheimer's, and with women and children who had been abused, and every single project was something that the Labour government made an effort to change and to invest in. Almost all of the projects that I worked in don't exist anymore. When I was 28, my mother got terminal cancer and needed caring for a huge amount, and even though I've got 3 brothers, obviously it fell to me to do a lot of that caring. And as my mother was dying, we were given proper hospice care. We had round-the-clock nursing in our home. We had support workers and advice workers that came to our house to make sure she was getting the right benefits, make sure she was having access to everything. None of this would exist today if she was sick. And so I thank my lucky stars that I was born at a time that when I was 16 and thought quite a lot of myself and said, oh, I'm going to be a Member of Parliament one day, that there was a political party that stood at the top of a ladder and cheered for me to climb up it. And without the Labour Party, without the policies that were put in place by the critical mass largely of women who were elected in 1997 and recognised that women like me, the lives that we led and what it would mean for us, without those women and without the Labour Party, there's no way a kid like me would have ever ended up a Member of Parliament. Just absolutely no way. So that is my journey to Parliament. I am a product of the Labour Party, so if you don't like what I say about it, it's your own fault. You did it, you created this monster, frankly. So once I got to Parliament, I think it has, just immediately before I worked in Parliament, I worked as a manager at Sandwell and the Black Country Women's Aid, working with victims of domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking and sexual exploitation, child sexual exploitation. So we ran services, in fact, for this area as well in human trafficking, and you would be surprised, maybe not so much now, but when I took it over, the amount of people being trafficked into this area is in the hundreds every year, not the tens. There are hundreds and hundreds of people being trafficked into the West Midlands every single year. And people being trafficked out, in fact, as well. So when I went to Parliament, I went with a very, very clear line of sight of the things that I wanted to achieve. And my feminism is not for everyone, and I recognise that, frankly, I don't really care. But the fact of the matter is that I have an aim, and that is to improve society. And for me, and the things that I have seen, if people had seen the things that I have seen working in Women's Aid, working with women who were tied under a table and thrown scraps from the fridge by their 3-year-old because they weren't given any food, if you had met the teenagers who I met who were routinely exploited by kids in their classes, who would make them go to parties and perform all manner of horrendous acts, and they thought it was normal. All of those things turn me into the person that is certain that I have to change things, because all of those things only happen to those women because of their gender. It is because they are women, and there is a huge amount of things that we have to tackle, and we have to be brave enough to know that tackling equal pay, tackling sexual harassment, tackling maternity discrimination, equalising things for women is all part of the job of protecting the most vulnerable and improving our society. So the things I think that matter the most in trying to, in this historic week of 100 years of women's suffrage, and I know that a lot of people in the Labour Party especially don't think that we should necessarily celebrate too much, because it was certainly my great nan wouldn't have got the vote, but my great granddad would have 100 years ago. But do you know what? It was the beginning of the movement of women's rights, and it was the first sign of the exception that women deserved at least to exist. I mean, it was just like, thanks, we do exist, we should be allowed to vote. And you know, one of the reasons they didn't want women to vote in all the debates in Parliament, which I have read over, was they thought that women would all vote the same way. They thought that they thought back then we had some sort of massive WhatsApp group where we all just like worked in a block and said we're all voting this way. They were really worried that women would act as a block and all vote just for one party, and how difficult that would be for them. Because, you know, we're all the same. We're all interested in the same things, us women. But I think it is worth celebrating. However, it is only to be a platform to spring forward for the things that we have to do tomorrow. And the things that I think are the most important things that we have to campaign on, and which I hope in my time in Parliament, although most likely just within my lifetime, I would hope would change, was the issue of equal pay. Women are still paid 80 pence for every pound a man earns. And they're still, yesterday on the news, somebody said to me, oh, but, you know, the head of the fire service is a woman in London, the head of the police is a woman in London. I mean, there's obviously loads of women in London. You know, they could name like 10 things, 10 jobs that women had, and I thought, well, if you can name them, that's the problem. If we can still list the women who have the top jobs, there are 2 in FTSE 100 companies that have women in charge of them. We are half the sodding people. And people always say to me, we can't find women to do these jobs. And I'm like, swing a cat. We're everywhere. I mean, there's like loads of us. We're like on every corner. We're all around. So I don't hear that excuse. So the equal pay and better working rights for women. I'm working on a huge piece of work at the moment that is sort of come off the back of the whole Me Too sexual harassment issue of Harvey Weinstein, and it is specifically trying to make sure that women know their rights at work with regard to sexual harassment, because at the moment they simply don't. As somebody who worked in a bar for many years and worked in retail in shops, most young women working in their first job in, you know, behind the bar or, you know, in Primark, don't think that if a customer fills them on the arse that they're going to be able to do anything about that. And I have to say, when I was younger, I didn't think that, I just thought it was part of my job. I just thought that was one of the things I had to tolerate, being in that job. Young women, and massive props to the young people in the room, have stood up now and said, we're not going to tolerate this anymore, and we're not going to put up with it. But at the moment, if you think that a young woman who works in Topshop can go to her boss and just say, well, actually, this customer is just leched on me, or he waited for me after work, and I've got case study after case study in my inbox, and he made me feel uncomfortable, he's been following me around the shop. Do you think that they're going to get anything from that? At the moment, the law doesn't even protect them, because there is no law at the moment that protects people from third-party harassment. So if it's not your boss that does it, then so what? And that cannot be right. And we have to get young women activated to be joining the union, to be thinking that they have a right to have better rights, And to be funding that, so I am working with lots of organisations, including the TUC, including USDOR, including all the Time's Up people. There's fancy people in America, to try and come up with schemes to make sure that young women here are safe when they go to work, and that we would want to see what we would want to see for our daughters in work. So the sexual harassment piece of work, there needs to be a serious power shift and a power change in how we do that. We have got to change the culture around violence against women and girls in our society. 2 women are murdered every single week, and every year whilst I am in Parliament, I will read out the names of every woman murdered that year. And every year the list gets no shorter. It was particularly harrowing to have to read out the name of my own friend Jo Cox, our friend and dear colleague, after she was murdered. And one of the things that has been talked about quite a lot this week has been violence against political women. And I mean, there's no way of saying this without sounding like you're old, Colleen. You've been around a lot longer than me. I think it is as bad as it has ever been in the political environment. For a woman to speak up comes with a hell of a lot of abuse. That doesn't stop us doing it, and it's not us that actually matter in this, notwithstanding how awful it was to have to deal with one of your friends and colleagues being murdered, but it is young people when they speak up, or new women who are a bit nervous but want to get involved in politics, will see the abuse that women get when they try and have an opinion online or at a meeting, and they will run for the hills. We are damaging our democracy by allowing this sort of feral environment, and we have got to do, and it is on all of our heads to stop it, because I am passionate and I want to fight, and I will do almost anything to achieve my aims. But bullying people who are easy to bully is a weak argument. It is a weak way to win, and I have suffered horrendous abuse at the hands of both the left and the right in politics. People mocking up images of me being stabbed, people threatening to hang my children. I've had all manner of rape threats and death threats. Death threats are a near, it's a regular thing, and you have to be tough to do this job, but you shouldn't have to be that tough. And we have got to do something to clamp down on how the online space works in our democracy, because it is just awful. And the final thing that the Labour Party has always been brilliant at, that needs to be even better at, we could always do more, is women's representation. So all the councillors in the room, put up your hands, all the people who are councillors or have been councillors. So I think you're all right in Coventry, but in this room you're doing all right, Coventry. You're a self-selecting group in this room. I mean, you're slightly segregated, but nonetheless, there are seats over here. Near the bar. Yeah, near the bar. I see. I like it. Typical. But we have got to, in local council, there is still a real problem with women's representation. We have got to make sure that we tackle that, because the decisions that actually, having been a member of Parliament and a local councillor, I want you to know, people in the room in the local council, you have a lot more power when you're a local councillor, and you can actually directly change more people's lives and feel the change that you are making. And so if you have that power to actually change people's lives and improve people's lives as well as decimate people's lives, which is what it feels like local councillors are being forced to do more and more at the moment than ever before, we should make sure that the people who get to make those decisions look and sound and have lived the life of the people they make those decisions on behalf of. And at the moment, the Labour Party is better, but there's still a massive need for local councils to be more representative. The Women's Parliamentary Labour Party is 44% women. And I think by the next election, all things being equal, it will be 50-50. But the Labour Party has this sticky problem of never being able to really promote those women to the top job. And that is an issue that it definitely should face and not be afraid of talking about and facing head on. But we need metro mayors. I mean, we didn't what happened in the West Midlands? Can I just ask that question? Had the election been a week later, we would have won, wouldn't we? Oh, God, man, what a day. I really couldn't believe it. Can I just say Birmingham did its job? He won, the Labour Party. So did Coventry. All right, well done, Coventry. Birmingham and Coventry, you can get a tip.
Landslide victory.
If it wasn't for what?
If Birmingham worked as hard as Coventry did, we
I mean, that may well be true, but I can't deny that. You may well be right. I mean, I worked quite hard, but I'm just one person. But yeah, I mean, it was Solihull that let us down. Solihull. Thanks for that. And Warsaw. Dudley. Anyway, but our metro mayors, who are in charge of our cities, our businesses, our transport, all of them in the Labour Party are men. Every single last one is a man. And that doesn't feel right. Our police and crime commissioners, I think that Labour has one female police and crime commissioner, Vera. Oh, in the West Midlands we have the deputy, but Vera is the only elected female police and crime commissioner. We are half the people. So I think that the Labour Party needs to try and do something about that as well. But like I say, the Labour Party is better, much, much, much better than any of the other parties. So we should also be proud of ourselves for that. So those are the things I think that we have to tackle as a party. We have to, and as you've been hearing today, from Westminster, whether you have, I mean, it's very hard to tell actually whether anyone is ever paying any attention to what goes on in there. I have to say, living in two different places, I have become so aware of how London-centric the world is and the gaze of the world is. I remember watching Newsnight one night. It's the national news night, and the whole nation could tune into this, and there was a whole 10-minute thing on the Garden Bridge in London, and I thought, buy a fucking hanging basket. Why do we have to listen to this? We can't afford to cut the blinking grass where I live in the parks. Got a bloody bridge for flowers. Honestly. I met Joanna Lumley the other day, I didn't say that to her. She loved that garden bridge. I just was like, it's nice to meet you. But yeah, the whole world is about London. Everything is about London. Every decision that is made is about London. And the Labour Party, I worry, will become a bit London-centric itself. And that is a real worry. So, I'm all for rail renationalisation. I'd renationalise it tomorrow if it was down to me. But we have got to remember that only 7% of the population actually go on trains. And of that 7%, the vast majority of them live in the south of the England and around London and commute in and out of London. I was at having coffee with some of my friends on the school run the other day, and they were all like, yeah, we really, really love rail nationalisation, it's a really great policy. And I said, when was the last time you went on a train? And they were like, oh, I don't go on the train. I never go on a train. So we have got to make sure that we don't become completely set, because I'd really rather talk about the buses if it was down to me, but there we go. So I think that the party is moving in the right direction with regard to women's rights, but we still have to keep on constantly pushing, and the Tories will start to catch up. They're much better than they were 10, 20 years ago, and we can no longer claim to be the party of equality unless we make an extra push now. So, you can ask me any questions. Tories will say this thing, they always say this statistic where they say, oh, under the coalition government, the gender pay gap narrowed and it's the smallest it's ever been. I mean, actually it will just naturally get shorter over time without anybody doing anything. However, the reason that it dropped under that is because men's wages were so suppressed. And as a sister, like, you know, that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted us to earn more, not them to earn less. You know, because we do live together, us men and women, in lots of places. Like, you know, I do have a husband. I do also want him to get paid. It does still pay the bills. So, yeah, I think the BBC have fallen heavily into that trap. And they would argue that the public money that they spend has to be carefully spent, and so they can't just go whacking up women's wages, even though that's what they did for the men. I have to say I love the BBC and I would die in a ditch for it, and there's a lot of media outlets who want the BBC to fail and they don't like the monopoly that it has. And you know, I would pay my licence fee just for the radio, to be perfectly honest. I love the BBC and like Blue Planet, I mean, who couldn't love that? However, I have been utterly disappointed with their response to the equal pay situation. It has been wrong at every turn, and for a communications company, their communications has been horrendous. Telling the women they weren't allowed to speak, but letting the men speak as if the men weren't also affected by this. Basically, publishing a report that says, oh, it's not sexist. It's like, I mean, it is, because we've got eyes. They were getting paid less. So yeah, the BBC, you know, whilst I would still die in a ditch for it, you know, that ditch is getting less likely for me to die in it every day that they do something wrong. So yeah, it's appalling that they behave like that. They should just pay the women more. So I recently wrote a report with the Women in Work All Party Parliamentary Group all about how the sort of what they call the fourth generation, the fourth industrial revolution will affect women's jobs. And actually, most of the data, if you look historically, it absolutely has affected women's jobs. There's no two ways about that. However, where it hasn't affected people's jobs in the past, when we had other steps forward in our industrial strategy, there's quite a lot of evidence that there was always jobs created to look after the machines, but they were always considered to be higher skilled jobs, and so they naturally went to the men. So what we have got to do, the government have got to have a strategy with an actual target in it. It's not okay just to say, yes, we want more women in engineering. You have to say that if you have a government contract, so many of the people have to be women in your training programmes, because without it, the industrial strategy at the moment for the UK is very weak actually on the future of jobs, but it is spending billions of pounds of our money, all of our money in this room, and 1% of the jobs that it creates will go to women. That cannot be right. So we have to work with companies. At the moment, all we can do is what I like to call the triumph of hope over experience, which is just asking people nicely to be better. And so I'm working, for example, with the people who are developing HS2 to try and say, as it goes forward, what jobs are you going to put in place for women? And they are pretty good. But at the moment, there is very, very little, I think, in government strategy to deal with the fact that if you think of travel agents or people on a checkout, classic women's jobs that don't really exist anymore, even now. There are less people working on checkouts in supermarkets. There aren't travel agents because everybody just does it online. We have already seen the first phase of the automation of women's jobs go. However, those jobs do still exist somewhere, whether that's in an Amazon factory or through one of the companies online, and we just have to make sure that women are replacing in those jobs. But making sure will only happen if we actually have targets, strategies, and somebody checking, and the government at the moment are not willing to commit to that. But I would, I would commit to having government. If you have government money on your contract, it has to benefit half the people. At the moment, that's not the case. So that's what I would do. I would always also have targets around apprenticeships and what they have to be for, because actually 54% of all the new apprenticeship starters are women,
Yeah, they are all in care professions and hair and beauty largely. It's very, very small percentage are in what turns into higher paying jobs. As for the WASPy women, it is a total travesty what happened to the WASPy women. My mother-in-law is a WASPy woman, and she gave up her job to help me when I wanted to stand for election, and she decided to take early redundancy from her job, thinking she was going to get her pension, and she did it because I was ambitious and she wanted to help our family, and then she never got her pension and she was out of pocket. She just got it like last week. She got her bus pass and she was like flashing it around all chuffed. Although Andy Street should definitely give the bus passes to the women regardless. He should give it to all the WASPy women, but he refused when we asked him. And it is a total travesty that those women were affected in that way, not just because they paid for it, it's their money, but because that generation of women, my mother-in-law's generation, didn't have any of the stuff that I have had. And it is thanks to women of that generation fighting for me to have free childcare. My mum had nothing. My mum invented, her and her mates got together and had women's liberation playgroup where each person did a day, because there was no formalised childcare when my mum was a kid. Not when I was a kid, and my mum had none of that. And women like her fought for women like me to be able to go to the best schools, go to university. Nobody went to university when my mum was a kid. That just unfathomable that working class kids did it. And they did all of that work without any of the benefits, the tax credits, any of that, what I had. And then it was taken away from the one thing they had, was taken away from them, and that isn't okay. And it is a travesty that is the case, that the generation who are the carers for the grandchildren and the elderly relatives at the same time have been so badly shortchanged. We owe a debt to those women, and we are not paying it. It's terrible. It's very difficult to judge anything in politics anymore, isn't it? I've given up making predictions because I'm always wrong, and you pop out for milk at the moment and there's a new world order by the time you come back. I like to think that the next leader of the Labour Party will be a woman. I like to think that. I think that when Andy Burnham was asked, didn't he say, is it about time? And he said, well, maybe not quite yet. Well, that's something slightly awkward. But I think that the next one, I like to think that the next one, but to be honest, the only way that we're going to get a woman leader of the Labour Party is if like the Tories did last time, there was only women that anyone could pick from, and then Andrea Leadsom dropped out anyway, didn't she? So Theresa May was crowned rather than elected. Is that if the candidates for the members to pick from, I think, are all women, and there's no mechanism for that to happen at the moment, and I don't think that there will be a mechanism for that to happen. But the members of Parliament who get the first go at who goes on the shortlist might act in a savvy manner, but it also relies on some of the men who might want the job not putting themselves forward. But that's unlikely. The reason it's ineffective is because we don't have pay transparency in this country, although there's only one country in the world that really has pay transparency, and that's Norway, where everybody's wages get printed. I would be love that. It's like the day you could look it up, like what Sue from over the road was getting paid. That would be brilliant. But without, and unsurprisingly, there is much less of a pay gap in Norway. But we don't have proper pay transparency. And whilst the Equal Pay Act, it was only in the last 3 years that Birmingham City Council actually paid the women what they were paying the men, because there's many the Equal Pay Act, in the way that it is written, there's many ways around it, because it is definitely illegal, and you will be charged if you have somebody with the same job, literally the same job, being paid a different wage because of their gender, which is what is happening at the BBC. They are banned to rights. So that is much, but that's really explicitly illegal. But if you just give somebody a slightly different job title, or you just make out like their job is less skilled, and therefore this person deserves to be paid more, it is amazing how you'll realise that the jobs we consider to be skilled are all the jobs that men do and not the jobs that women do. And the reason the gender pay gap, which is different to equal pay, persists is because of the way that we consider women's work and men's work. So my husband, who is a lift engineer, whilst I was working at Women's Aid, now I have 2 degrees. My husband had no formal academic qualifications but had an MBQ level 3 in engineering, and he was always, no matter, I was managing thousands of people every year were coming through the service that I was in charge of. I was raising millions of pounds to help women and children and developing and creating new services for thousands and thousands of people. My husband was fixing lifts when they were broken. Both are important. My husband always got paid more than me because where I worked at Women's Aid, it's a women's job, charity and care work. Doesn't matter as much. And also, when I worked beyond my hours, I didn't get paid for it, but I did it anyway because it needed to be done. When he worked beyond his hours, my God, the level of standby rate and call out, he'd get like an extra 20 quid just if someone phoned him up. And I was like, I mean, obviously he had a good union. I'm not criticising it, I was pleased. But I used to ring him all the time, but he said it didn't count. I'll earn you 100 quid tonight, mate. But that, women, we undervalue our own work. We give it away for free far too easily, and we allow the very difficult work that we do to be undervalued. And we're allowing, I mean, it's not our fault that the gender pay gap exists, but we do undervalue our own efforts and our own work, and we shouldn't do that. Because all the women in this room will have done something that they will shrug and say, oh, it's nothing, I don't mind. And yeah, I'll stay, don't worry, I'll stay late, I'll cover your shift, oh, don't worry about it. Whereas my husband, down tools at 5 o'clock, if they wanted him to work, he'd have been on double bubble, no denying. Whereas I would have been like, of course I'll stay, because a woman's just turned up with her kids and they've got their belongings in bags. So that's the problem, is that the work that men do, we think is more skilled. We judge it to be more skilled and therefore we pay them more. If men did more caring roles, care would be considered to need to be paid more. So you need to do some more caring roles as well, men. It's not just about women in the boardroom, it is about men staying in the kitchen as much as it is the other way around. There's nothing more frustrating than being in Parliament and saying like, well, you shouldn't do that to nurses' bursaries, this is what's going to happen. And them going, oh, it won't, you're wrong. And then even when it happens, you say, well, this has happened. And they go, it isn't happening. It happens about everything. They just say I mean, this week at Prime Minister's Question Times, Jeremy Corbyn, the very first question, very brief, very certain question where he said, why are there 21,000 less police officers? Because that is a provable fact. And she just sort of went, there's more money going into the police than ever before. And it's just like, what? We're living in a real country. Did they just stack all those police officers for lols? I mean, just explain yourself. But they are convinced that they are right. The nurses' bursary thing is I actually think one of the single most stupid pieces of legislation that they got through. Wes Streeting, one of our colleagues, was really, because he used to be the head of NUS and really fighting for the student nurses. I was on the childcare bill at the time when the nurses' bursary thing was happening, and the childcare bill now, everybody gets 30 hours free childcare. Everybody who works 15 plus hours or 16 plus hours. So you have to work to get it. And I said, what about nurses who are in training? They're not working and they're not even entitled to the free childcare. I mean, I find that absolutely phenomenal. It's like layer upon layer of student nurses. Both my babies were delivered by student midwives, and they're working. They're now paying to work for free.
Yeah, that's right.
That is unbelievable. They're paying to work. I mean, that's definitely a minimum wage issue going on there. They're paying to go to work. How can that be right? And it's not like me. I mean, I did my degree in the bath. I mean, I just wrote, it's not like they go to work. They're working every day. I cannot believe it's so... The lack of foresight, and unsurprisingly, there are less, and there are going to be less foreign workers, as you said. It is going to be total calamity and total collapse. And I used to think that people who said that they were just trying to run down the NHS so that they could privatise it all were, slightly, I thought that was maybe a bit of a conspiracy theory, but it does seem that that is the case. Because that stupid decision, it can't be made from anywhere, any evidence base. It can only be made from a sort of heart of darkness. You're right, it's frustrating. It is awful. What are we going to do? My son has had an operation put off for 2 years. So it is already affecting, it is our families, like you say. Terrible. I think you're right. I was just at a meeting before I came here because there was a school in my constituency that was free schools that were opened. There was a number of them opened in the poorest areas in Birmingham, and they went completely bankrupt, and it was basically a total swindle. And so another academy chain is having to take over this school, and there's a massive black hole, and I'm just doing everything that I can to stop this school shutting down. And I stood in the meeting and people were like, well, it's not fair, my kids were going to that one, now you're saying they're going to have to go to that. I was like, don't blame me, I voted Labour. This is... I mean, to be fair, in the area I was in, they all did too. I think in the box where they lived, there was 3 people who didn't vote for me, and I definitely know them. But nonetheless, the point stands. I don't understand. When the Queen was found to be part of the Paradise Papers and she was investing in Bright House, my brother rang me up and was like, right, this is it. There's going to be a revolution. We can't have like the toffs literally making money off the backs of the poorest, most vulnerable people. People are going to be out with pitchforks. This is going to be it. This is the moment. I was like that, but it's not going to happen. And it fizzles away like a blip. I think that how we get everybody to vote Labour, or enough people to vote Labour, and we are 65 seats away from a majority of 1. So we have an uphill battle. I think in the last election we both sides went to the mattresses, both massively increased their national take. So now it isn't like we found the Labour vote. We now have a job of convincing some of the people who voted over here to move over to us, and trying to do that is not easy. And so I think we have got to have an element of pragmatism. But the truth is real passion, being really passionate. Whatever you think about Jeremy Corbyn, and I have made my views clear in the past. People like that he is passionate and that they feel that he says what he thinks and is realistic about what he thinks. Sorry, not realistic, passionate. I think sometimes he's not very realistic. But the truth is we have got to be much more like that at every single level of our politics and be out in our streets, not necessarily wearing Labour Party badges, but helping people on in school campaigns and helping people in every sort of aspect of their life, making people realise that politics is a thing. And that isn't easy. It isn't easy. So how we're going to do it, I'm not... People think that if there's an election tomorrow that the Labour Party would win, and I just don't think we're anywhere near that yet. Also, I don't think there's going to be an election tomorrow. Just FYI. What? You think there's going to be one tomorrow? I mean, legally that would be quite hard.
I think we would win.
Oh, you think we would win? Oh, sorry. I got like anxious then that there was an election tomorrow. My husband rang me on, I don't think it was sort of like, I don't know, it was like November the 18th and said, I just want you to know that this is the last day that legally there could be an election this year. So if she'd have to call it today, so put your feet up. Because there's not going to be an election in 2017. I mean, I think we will win the next one, but if it were tomorrow, we're not there yet. I think that there is a massive hill to climb, and the Brexit stuff is starting to become toxic, yeah, on either side. I mean, I'm just bored of it myself, bored of Brexit. So,
Through the lobbies 8 times.
oh my gosh, we voted 8 times. It took 2.5 hours just to walk around in circles. People think our democracy is beautiful. I've obviously never taken part in the highest echelons of it. It is sweaty, and some of the people are drunk. It's really hot in there, isn't it, in the lobby? And we're all got coat because hopefully you're going to be able to leave.
It is after 8 votes. I was losing my voice saying another vote straight away, another vote straight away. And people were dizzy.
It was crackers.
Brexit now is in the Lords, so we heard this week that it's going to come back round about May.
Maybe it can stay there for a while, as far as I'm concerned.
2nd or 3rd week of May, it'll start coming back with all the amendments, etc. that the Lords have put in. But it's been hard work, and the amount of times we've voted, and you know, I mean, everybody knows that we vote late. But this has been really, really late into the morning, just going round in circles and voting on the many, many amendments.
But we did win one.
We won one.
Yes,
yeah,
that
we
was
won one.
really good.
Which is having the meaningful vote at the end. I mean, whether that, that'll come to.
That was the funnest
fruition
day
or not.
ever in Parliament. I loved that day.
I know. I mean, that was the day that we actually won one, and it was really hard work as well. But
for the whips, it was.
Yeah,
I don't think people realise Colleen is a whip, and to get the whip, to get people to vote in the right lobbies and make sure that every bugger is there. I mean, that's no mean feat. Ringing round a load of Labour MPs who think that they're, telling them they've got to stay up late and be away from their kids, or in some cases come out of hospital to vote.
I have to say that the West Midlands guys, or all the guys that I look after, all turn up and all vote, so they're really pretty good. Perhaps they're just scared of me. I don't know.
We're just we're loyal.
But it is it's a hard job at the moment. We don't win any votes, and I think, I mean, you'll agree, Jess, that the arrangements that were made with the DUP when the government needed a majority, they have stated to the Tory party, that we will not vote with you on everything. We will only support you on the big bills that are going through. You have our loyal support, but on other things we're not going to support you. So what do the Tory party do? They don't vote. They don't vote on opposition days. They don't vote in any backbench stuff.
There won't be anything to do with welfare.
Not at all.
Because the DUP represents some of the poorest bits of the country. Really seriously poor, and they are actually quite. I mean, I would never call them progressive. They believe in creationism, but they are not backward about welfare. They recognise that lots of their people will be really impoverished with any further welfare cuts. So we just don't vote on anything anymore. There's just nothing going on in Parliament apart from Brexit and the Tories sitting on their hands and not voting.
Yeah.
So, like WASPI is a good example. I think the DUP wouldn't vote with the government on WASPI.
No, they wouldn't.
If we could manage to, bedroom tax, they'd definitely vote that down. But there is no legislation going through that you can put your hat on it. So we can't just go and say get rid of. If that was how it worked. We just said motion, get rid of bedroom tax. We'd have it through by now. But
it's
the government are gone to ground.
They have.
Crackers.
So we have to wait for the next election. That's the only way. And we all know, don't we, that you have to be in control to get anything done.
There is lots of laws that currently could be used if you ring the police. There's harassment laws, there's there is rules about different sorts of harassment online and things. You know, the laws are there, but proving it is very, very difficult. It relies on the companies working with government to do something about it. And this week, actually, the DCMS committee, so the Department for Culture, Media and Sport committee, is going over to Washington and LA to question Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, all of those, because it does feel like they could be doing more. For me, on Twitter, the fact that people are completely anonymous, I don't mind if they're anonymous to us, because I can understand all the reasons why, working in domestic violence services, I can understand the reasons why people might want to be anonymous online, but they shouldn't be anonymous to the provider. The provider should be able to, or have some way of being able to trace them, because the people who made the very worst threats about me was on a site called Reddit. I mean, I say that like, you know, I'm turning into my mom. I really, like, I don't understand all these different sites. But it was on a site called Reddit, and when they looked for where it was coming from, when the police looked into it, it was in like a server in Colombia. So it's just, it leaves a cold trail, so you can't really do anything about it. But actually, it relies on victims doing an awful lot of work to get a conviction. So Luciana Berger has, I think Stella Creasy has as well, and Stephen Kinnock as well. I think they've all taken perpetrators of sort of online harassment and threats to court and won. So, but that relies on you doing a huge amount of work. And I've worked with the West Midlands Police on this, and they say to me, "Will you go through and look through it all and find us the evidence and stuff?" And after about 20 minutes, she was giving up the will to live. To be perfectly honest, of reading just pages and pages of people being vile about you, and it's bad for my nerves. So I just stopped and thought, "Sod it, I can't be bothered." The system of our policing, how we police it and how seriously we take it, how the companies need to be reacting, and whether the current laws are clear enough to get a conviction. They all need work, but it is a massive. I think that when we open Pandora's box with all, we don't realise. My husband was going to bed the other night. He said, "I'm going up to bed to read." I said, "What are you going to read?" And I said, "Well, you know, what are you reading?" And he said, "Oh, the internet." I was like, "All right." He said, "But I think I'm nearly finished." It's like, I've come back round to the beginning. I think it's done. So maybe we'll all stop going on the internet so much. Oh, you are absolutely right that they're within, whilst you say women are worse off, within other groups, and if you are a black woman, you are absolutely, a black woman, a disabled woman, a Jewish woman, you are the most likely, but out of the women, you are much more likely. However, if you are black or Asian, disabled, gay, openly gay online as a man, you are much more likely to get abuse than your average white man, let's say. And that is true in society as well. So what you're describing, I assume, I don't know, is a hate crime, and we need to make sure that there is a hate, that hate crime is handled with the severity that it leaves with the victim. So being attacked because somebody's robbing you is horrendous and frightening. Being attacked physically because of who you are is horrendous, traumatic, but it's also demoralising. It is to demoralise you. The reason people use threats, violence, anger and aggression against people from other who look a different way or come from a different gender is to control them, is to keep their power, is because they want to maintain power. And we have got to criminalise that behaviour. Now, it is a hate crime to commit a racial attack against somebody. It is a hate crime. How well hate crimes are followed up is not very well, I don't think. I think it could always be better if the police had more resources, etc., etc. But it isn't a hate crime to assault somebody because they are a woman. Misogyny isn't a hate crime. So if somebody threatens to rape and kill me online, that isn't a hate crime. Whereas if they said something racist and then did it, then it would be. So it would be. So I personally am campaigning to make misogyny a hate crime, for that reason. But you're right. You know, I mean, what happened to you is a hate crime, and we've got to be better at responding to that. But at the moment, the police can barely respond to the most severe things that are happening. You know, domestic violence call-outs waiting hours, if not days, before anyone turns up. Hate crime. I mean, if you rang up to report a hate crime, unless you were in imminent risk of danger right now, the likelihood that you're going to see anybody for even the next few days to take your statement, because there just aren't enough police officers. There needs to be more. My friend, who's a midwife, and actually has left midwifery because she doesn't get paid enough to basically daily be in charge of people's lives. And I didn't realise this, but if you are a midwife and something bad happens on your shift, she is culpable as an individual.
Yeah.
And when you're left on, that's something you could tolerate if it was you working with 2 other women on, you know, if you had 1 woman each. But when you're left on a ward and there's 6 women in labour and they're all yours, how can she possibly look after them and then be culpable if something happens? It is management that is culpable. It is the government that is culpable in that instance. But we went to Mallorca on holiday, as we do once a year, and as we're walking through, as you know, there's people who spray you with the perfume when you're walking through duty free, and Birmingham Airport now force you to walk through duty free. It's irritating. I love Birmingham Airport. And Ruth said to me, "Oh, that woman, I bet she earns more than me." And my friend Ruth, saving people's lives, is on about £9 an hour. How can that be right? That is terrible. And so she has left that job to train to be a house visitor, because she's less likely to kill people in the house visiting because of a lack of resources. That is where we are. That is the state of play at the moment. Good, brilliant people leaving the profession because they're endangering people's lives with the practices that are currently going on. That isn't okay. So the Labour Party would have to. I think we are now actually at the pinnacle where it's got so bad that people are maybe waking up, and because I've been saying that there were cuts to Birmingham City Council till I was blue in the face for the past 10 years. Now people can see it. There's 32 children in my son's class. There were 29 when he started at the school. I now have to pay for things for the school. I have to send his books back at the end of the year. I don't get to keep them anymore. They send them home and I send them back with my kids at the start so that they can use the same books again. People, ordinary people who aren't obsessive, people like us, they're starting to notice that stuff is wrong. So now it is at its worst, and in the NHS, nowhere more than there is it at its worst. In industrial strategy, there is a bit of money for the electrification of vehicles and the development of it, but we're sort of like 10 years too late, actually, in being the world leader in that, and it's a real shame for the West Midlands, which is the home of car manufacturing, that we aren't the ones leading the world in this. So I would certainly like to see a Labour government. The Labour manifesto is quite big on investment in different industrial strategies, and so I would certainly want to see it being about the future of the sort of technology that you're talking about, because I mean, thousands of people die every year of air pollution. Birmingham, there was a TV programme recently, and it was on the high street where I live, and it was the second worst place in the UK for air pollution, and that is where my children, walk to school. They're breathing that stuff in, and they're both wheezy all the time. So we've got to do something about it, but we've got to make sure that we're not just buying it from abroad as well, that the home of car manufacturing remains to be the home of the future of this car manufacturing. But at the moment, I think Germany certainly had the run on us a long time ago.
Yes, they are.
Good for them. Councils. Oh yeah, well, it's actually European Union are putting in laws about. So in Birmingham city centre soon, you won't be able to drive in a diesel car. I think that's definitely on its way in, because of the terrible particulates and the terrible. And I've got a big van. I've got a VW van. It's not running on a battery. I'm really sorry. I would like it to. Have you ever been in a Tesla or been in an electric car? It's like shit off a shovel. They go so fast. There's no acceleration at all. This woman let me. It's terrifying, but brilliant. It's really like you just put your foot down and you're going at 60 miles an hour. It's terrifying. It's terrifying.
Electric taxis are really smooth. They're really smooth.
But yeah, I think the Labour government has to be looking at alternative energy sources, definitely. There is a definite problem that the people behind the scenes are, the decision makers definitely need to be more diverse. SPADs, as they call them, special advisors, need to be more diverse and aren't. The policy making in the Labour Party is done through the National Policy Forum, which I am actually on, but I'm never entirely sure what the process of the sausage machine of what ends up in the manifesto. But you are absolutely right. We need to make sure that issues that matter to women aren't always just put in the section of the manifesto that is women's issues, women inequalities issues. It's everybody's issues. And so in the section that we write about how we're going to invest in new battery technology and how we're going to have a new industrial strategy. What is our industrial strategy for care work, for example, which is, we talk about all these things needing to get on the reason we have to have an industrial strategy is to improve productivity, to get more people moving around, so improve our transport infrastructure so people can get to work and work all over the country. We have to include our, all the wires and stuff that we all use, the internet, fast broadband or whatever it's called. And it's all about that, but for lots and lots, for half of the population actually, the reason they can't get out isn't because they don't have the fancy road or the fancy train outside their house, or isn't because they can't get online, it's just because they have a caring responsibility that means they can't leave the house to go to work. So why on earth is childcare not in our industrial strategy? Why is it not women's jobs that are in our industrial strategy? So it isn't just that they have to be remembered in the women inequalities section. It is that the treasury section, the transport section, the health section, every single section should remember that women exist. And that is a challenge, I would say.
On that note, thank you, Jess, for coming along tonight and sharing your thoughts, and thank you for everyone who's come along tonight to ask Jess some questions. And tonight we have the leader of the council here, who is also chair of Coventry North East Constituency Labour Party, and I'd like to ask him to come up and say a few words. Thanks, George.
It is a fact that the franchise of 1918 and 1928, probably the most significant acts of Parliament that ever been. And frankly, colleagues, it was a hard win for women, and it was also a hard win for men as well to get the vote. And what we find at the moment is that the Tories are trying to undermine that. Individual voter registration, which they brought in 2010, was a clear attempt to undermine the previous acts, and now they're moving towards voter ID, in which you will not be able to vote unless you bring with you a passport or a gas bill or something like that. Again, they are trying to disenfranchise working people and fix the elections. What they didn't do in 2015, they thought they'd done it in 2015 because they won, because of individual voter registration, and then people went and ensured that they voted. 2 million people voted, 2 million people registered between sort of April and June last year, and that somewhat ruined their plans in respect to that. colleagues, we can say that Labour councils and Labour governments are the only way forward. And the truth of the matter is, how do we, effectively when we win, maintain Labour governments? And that, of course, has been the challenges. The big wins, 1945, 1966, and then 1997, when really people got fed up with the Tories. And what happened was, eventually, people forget what the Tories have done. People forgot what the Tories done in the 1930s, they forgot what they did in the 1950s, and they forgot what Thatcher did. We've got to ensure that we have the policies in place which people identify with, and when we implement them in government, people feel that they own those policies and that it's their way of life, and it's within the culture of the country that people do not go back to the Tories at some future date, whenever that might be. Jess, thank you ever so much, and thank you very much, colleagues.